Welcome to StarTalks powered by Advotalks. I am your host Siraj, and today we have with us our most esteemed guest, Mr. Faruq Abbas from Nigeria, a highly respected and influential figure in the commercial litigation as well as employment laws, with an exceptional, invaluable experience in multiple fields of law. Mr. Faruq Abbas has been practicing and handling cases independently with a result oriented approach, both professionally and ethically, and has now acquired many years of professional experience in providing legal consultancy and advisory services. He provides consulting in the various fields of law like family, property, employment, and commercial litigation, working through his law firm, Abdus Salam Abbas and Company, based in Nigeria. Today, he has joined us in StarTalks to express his insights and experiences, providing valuable perspectives on the employment discrimination and workplace safety concerns in Nigeria. His diverse expertise, steadfast dedication, and groundbreaking initiatives make him a distinguished guest for StarTalks. I should admit that I am quite excited to host him on today's episode. With that, I warmly welcome Mr. Faruq Abbas to our talk show, Star Talks powered by Advotalks. Welcome again to the show, Safaru.
Thank you very much, Siraj, for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be on Star Talks today, and I look forward to sharing my thoughts on employment discrimination and workplace safety in Nigeria. Thank you.
Yep. So let's start with a fundamental understanding on, what are the common types of employment discrimination that workers face in general from Nigeria perspective, Mr. Farouk.
Thank you for the question, Siraj. And there are various forms of discriminations that workers face in Nigeria, but the most prevalent, the most common one is gender-based discrimination. And when I say gender-based discrimination, I mean discrimination pertaining to women based on their pregnancies. We've seen cases where women who are pregnant are being discriminated against. We've seen cases where supervisors or employers try to harass females sexually, and when they decline their sexual overtures, they victimize them. In an extreme case, we have a case where a woman's employment was terminated because she refused to respond positively to her supervisor's sexual overtures. We also have cases where women who are taking care of their young children are also discriminated against. We also have a situation where women are discriminated against in terms of pay, where men on the same role with women are paid higher than women on role. We also have situations where people with disabilities are discriminated against. We have situations where people are discriminated against based on their religious beliefs, their religious outlook, the way they dress, the way they look. We've also had cases where people are discriminated against based on their health status. Perhaps they have some certain kind of ailment which the employer does not want to expose these other employees to. We also have cases where employees are discriminated against based on their past history of mental challenge, mental health issues, and all that. So, I mean, the list goes on. But we also have, of course, I forgot to mention that we have discrimination based on the education status. In Nigeria, when some people go to polytechnics and some go to universities, some employers believe that those who go to universities are better than those who go to polytechnics. We also have situations where even those who go to universities, some employers tend to focus on those who schooled abroad. You believe that the school abroad, you are better than those who schooled in Nigeria. You also have another instance where even in Nigeria, those who go to universities, because in Nigeria, we have private universities, we have federal universities, and we have state universities. There is discrimination between those who go to private universities and state universities, discrimination against those who go to state universities and federal universities. Some people believe that if you go to a federal university, you are better than someone who went to a state university. Some believe that if you go to a private university, you are better than those who went to federal and state university. So the list goes on and on.
It looks like it's a kind of varied facets and multiple angles are there. Like you have kind of uncovered their gender bias related aspects as well as the background of the people as well as the health conditions, and you have rightly mentioned that educational status as well as where they have kind of gone for the schooling and etc. can also influence certain concerns, right? As you mentioned. So I'm quite excited to continue with you on this particular discussion. So I wanted to understand a bit more about how the discrimination in the workplace will impact the overall productivity from the mental health perspective of the Nigerian employees.
Oh, of course, yes. When there's discrimination, it affects productivity significantly. If you look at the average company in Nigeria, you'll see that the rate of employee turnover rate is very, very high. When you go to companies, employees don't stay long in companies. Some spend 6 months, some spend 2 years, 1 year. It is very rare these days to see young people who stay in a company for 10 years. I'm a lawyer. I have friends who run law firms. I've worked in several law firms in the past. I see what happens in these law firms. I have people who talk to me as mentors, and I have people who come to me with their experiences. So when there's discrimination, people lose focus, people are not interested in working, productivity declines, people go into drug abuse. There's a significant rise in drug abuse in Nigeria, and some of them can be traced to the way they feel at work. Also, people are relocating abroad. People are leaving Nigeria in droves. Some of them are not satisfied with their jobs. Some of them even leave the job entirely. We have lawyers who leave law firms based on the work environment and say, you know what, I don't want to ever practice law again. So you have people who leave some companies and say, I don't want to ever do this kind of job again, just because of their experience in a particular place of work. And if they had gone to another place that's very friendly, you will see that this sort of people will still thrive. So the discrimination is really affecting productivity in Nigeria. And if you will reduce the level of discrimination, people will be happy. When employees are happy, businesses thrive. Because if your employees are not happy, they can't perform very well to your clients and to your customers. So we are seeing it. If you look at the GDP rate in Nigeria, it's not as high as it should be. When the productivity is high, GDP goes up, economy is good, and everybody is happy. So it's significantly affecting productivity in the country.
I agree with that. The mental health as well as the productivity is kind of, of the employees is directly, related to the economy's growth as well. So I wanted to understand, like, are there any specific industries in Nigeria where these discrimination aspects are kind of, more rampant? Like, what do you think that is the case in Nigeria actually?
Okay, yes, discrimination. You find discrimination in the oil and gas sector. You find it in the manufacturing sector. You find it in the construction sector. You also find it in the banking sector. For the oil and gas sector, the sort of discrimination you see is oil companies. Some oil companies tend to believe that when you're an expatriate, you have more experience than Nigerians in certain kind of positions. So you find some companies that tend to put in foreigners, expatriates to hold certain positions, notwithstanding the fact that we have Nigerians who are very qualified to hold that same role. So this went on for a very long period of time, and the National Assembly had to pass a law, the local contents law, saying that before you bring in an expatriate to fill a role, you must ensure that there are no Nigerians who can fill that role. And you must also train the human resource in Nigeria. You can't just come to Nigeria to conduct your business without improving the human resource, without training them to be able to take over from your expatriates. But the law is being implemented now, and with the enactment of the law, we've seen a significant reduction in discrimination in that sector. The manufacturing sector as well, you also see this sort of discrimination because most of the manufacturing companies, a significant portion of them are owned by foreigners. A lot of foreigners who come to invest in the country. So you see that in some leadership positions, they put some expatriates who are not as qualified as Nigerians. In some cases, you see people who have not gone to the university and they are supervising Nigerians who are higher, more qualified than them. So you see discrimination in those sectors too. In the banking sector too, there used to be significant discrimination, but I mean, with the kind of advocacy and all, it has reduced significantly. And now you see that in Nigeria, you have a lot of women holding leadership positions in the bank. It wasn't always like that. The banks have always been dominated by the male, but that has also changed, and you see improvements. But largely, those are the sectors. And of course, some people will tell you that in the legal industry, especially when it comes to advocacy, you see more men going to court. You see more men.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you have significant number of judges. Before, you used to have male judges, but now in Lagos State, where I practice, there are a large number of female judges, and we are seeing a lot number of female judges. The CJN of Nigeria that was just sworn in last week, she's a female. So you are seeing a lot of females there. But the truth is that when it comes to advocacy, male are in the majority. It's more like people regard it as a male-oriented profession. So if you permit me to mention maybe even law, when it comes to advocacy, you will see that a lot of firms tend to prefer men for litigation because of the hassles and bustles of having to travel around the country, work late at night, and all of that. So those are the sectors where we see where we see discrimination. Of course, in the I mentioned construction sector. In the construction sector, what you find is you see contractors bringing in foreigners from even neighboring African countries, from Togo, from Benin Republic, from Mali, to work as the tiler, to work as a plumber, to work as a painter, to work as the carpet, the roof, people making the roof. And what they tell you is that those people are more skilled than Nigerians. And I find that hard to believe. You can't say in a country where we have over 200 million people, you can't find good carpenters, you can't find good plumbers, and you have to travel all the way to Benin Republic, to Togo, to bring in foreigners. So that's, in my own opinion, that's a form of discrimination that we also see in the construction industry.
Right, you have brought in multiple industries like oil and gas, manufacturing and construction, and of course in the services aspects as well. And thanks for bringing this point. Legal field is not going to be an exception in this aspect. I kind of admire the range of the industries that you have covered, specifically coming to the industries which are kind of more prone to kind of accidents and then the safety concerns. I wanted to understand, like especially in the oil and gas and the construction fields, right? So what are the most common safety concerns when it comes to workplace safety for Nigerian workers across these type of industries?
Okay, yeah. So when you talk about concerns, the most prominent is inadequate personal protective equipment. Equipment that you should give people your workers who come to the site. Another one that is very prevalent is the exposure to hazardous chemicals. There's a lot of gas flaring. There's a lot of chemical for manufacturing and all that. When you expose workers to these sort of chemicals, it tends to affect their health. Recently, I read a report where an environmental impact assessment was conducted in a particular farm, and they saw that all their crops were dying, and they were wondering what's happening, why are crops not growing? And by the time they brought in the environmentalists, they discovered that there was a cement factory several kilometers away. So the emission from the cement factory was what was affecting and killing the plants. So you ask yourself, if you have emissions that can kill plants, what will those emissions do to human beings? So you have that. You also have inadequate training. When you have your workers, a lot of them are not skilled, they are illiterate. When the companies don't train them adequately, so some of them don't know how to handle certain kind of equipment. And even in cases where you train them to put on all this equipment, they don't even use them. You also have the issue of low quality materials. You have some engineers, some contractors who use low quality materials in their sites, and this has led to the collapse of multiple buildings in Nigeria where lives are lost and all that. You also have the issue of access into the factory, into the site, and free access. Then you also have the issue of fire safety and first aid services. You find that in some cases, when you have emergencies, the employees who are on ground don't even have the capacity to provide first aid treatment. And in cases where lives could have been saved, where injuries could have been reduced, but because the people on ground are not well trained with first aid practices, you see unnecessary loss of lives and injuries. So those are essentially the major kind of issues that we have to deal with when it comes to safety concerns at the workplace.
Right. So I think like training plays a lot of vital role, as I understand. Like I definitely would say that the adequate training on the aspects of the workplace safety as well as the fire and safety and other stuff should be kind of brought in more into this context. I would try to kind of dive in to understand your personal experiences where workplace safety standards have been kind of little bit convinced, or rather it may be a good case where it was followed to a good extent in Nigeria. So please, Mr. Faruq.
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, I've seen a lot of cases where safety workplace were followed. I mean, I work for a couple of construction companies, and just last week, I went to one of my client sites. Is building a multiple residential units in Yaba in Lagos here, and some government officials were coming for inspection. So he told me to come and see the site, and he wanted to buy another property beside the property. So he wanted me to accompany him there. And when I got there, as we were about to enter, he said I won't be able to enter because I'm not putting on the safety boots, And when I saw there, I saw all their inscriptions on the wall. I saw everybody wearing safety boots. Even he was putting on the safety boots with the helmets and the reflection jackets, we wore that. And you see that in Lagos State now, because of our experience in the past where we've had a lot of building collapse, the Lagos State government is now taking it very serious to ensure that contractors comply with their regulations. So with the building regulations. So in Nigeria now, you see that there's an upsurge in compliance, especially in Lagos State. So I've seen that happen. And an instance where I've also seen where there was no safety concern that was used was in a property in Ikoyi, where the property collapsed and several people died. Some workers who were sleeping on the site, they were there and they were caught up under the rubbles and they died. And the reason, after an investigation was done, the reason for the collapse was lack of usage of low quality materials and lack of engaging. They didn't engage professionals, adequate engineers. The Lagos State government had sealed the property in the past, but the person who was developing the property went back to appeal and ensure that the property was opened unofficially. And if the contractor had used quality materials, the buildings would not have collapsed, and those people who lost their lives wouldn't have died. So, and it was a widely reported case. There's also another case again in an estate where properties also collapsed and people also died. But the funny thing is, when all these things happen, we don't hear when the contractors are sent to jail or are made to pay significant fine. Yes, they might be arrested for a couple of days, but eventually the case will die down and the contractors will change the name of their company and they go on business as usual. So these are cases that we see and they are widely reported in the media. Yeah, thank you.
Right. So on that aspect of the companies, like as a proactive measure, what companies actually in Nigeria do to prevent the discrimination during the recruitment and the promotion processes, as well as I wanted to understand a bit of the role of trade unions or the advocacy groups of the employees. How do they play in combating the discrimination, concerns in Nigeria?
Okay, so this is a multiple question. You're asking about trade union and you're asking about recruitment process. So I'll talk about the trade union one. The trade unions in Nigeria and the non-government organizations, these are the social groups, they play a very fantastic role in reducing discrimination in Nigeria. And if you see a lot of the cases we have in Nigeria where discriminatory practices were challenged, were actually brought up by trade union, were actually brought up by some of the NGOs. As recently as this year, the Nigerian Bar Association, which is more or less like an association of lawyers, took up a case against the Nigerian police force where they had a regulation saying that an unmarried female police woman would need to get the approval of the police authorities before she can get married to a husband, and that you cannot get pregnant if you are unmarried as a female police officer. And the court held that those regulations were unconstitutional. They are discriminatory, because when you say an unmarried police woman should ask for approval before getting married, that same rule is not applicable to male policemen. When you say an unmarried policewoman cannot get pregnant during service, otherwise she will be dismissed, you didn't talk about an unmarried policeman impregnating a female. So the court struck down that provision. So that case was taken up by an NGO. You also have the oil and gas sector. The law I mentioned to you earlier, where I said advocates for local content, training of Nigerians. The law came about because of the trade union activities of workers in the oil and gas sector. Based on their picketing, based on their advocacy, the government had to listen to them and come up with that regulation. Also in the banking sector, based on the advocacy of the trade unions, workers in the banking sector, some regulations were put in place for the working condition, improved working condition for bankers. Also in the education sector, we have what we call the academic staff and non-academic staff. Based on the trade union activities of the non-academic staff, they were able to advocate for policies for themselves because they felt that they were being marginalized, they were being discriminated against, that the government was taking care of academic staff to their own detriment. And when they came together, they formed their union and they were able to advocate for more favorable terms. So trade unions and advocacy groups have worked tremendously, and they are improving compliance with regulations and laws in Nigeria and reducing discrimination significantly. Then regarding the second level of your question, where you talked about recruitment practices, how do companies tend to reduce discriminatory practices? One of the ways in which companies do that now is they focus more on the job description, what is expected of the job, of what you are going to be doing when you get employed. They pay less attention to the traits, characteristics, quality traits of the individual applying. That's one way they do. They focus on the job. So regardless of who you are, regardless of what you look like, regardless of whether you have a disability or not, if you are able to comply with the job description, you can apply. So that's one way they've done it. Another way they've done that is by outsourcing. They outsource recruitment services to HR companies, recruitment companies who are experts. And when these people are trying to recruit, they don't have any favoritism, they don't have any preferences, they just choose based on qualification. Another way they do this is when companies are trying to recruit, they ensure they have a balanced panel of interviewers. So they don't just limit interviewing process or recruitment process to just one officer in the company. They have a panel. So you have a panel that is diverse. When you have a panel that is diverse, when they are interviewing people, they are going to be diverse in their interview process. When it also has to do with promotion as well, they don't place the promotion of an employee in the sole hands of the line manager or supervisor. So yes, the input of the line manager or supervisor is important, but the management also looks at it to see, because we've had cases where the line managers victimized an employee, So these are ways in which companies try to be. And another way companies do, which I forgot to mention, is auditing their staff strength. So some companies randomly audit their staff strength. When they audit their staff strength, they see, okay, we have 20 employees, 17 of them are male, 3 are female. This is not good enough. So if we are going to employ in the next round, we need to give more preference to females, So they balance it in that way. Even religious-wise, they balance it. Okay, we have more people from a particular tribe. Now we need to include more people from another tribe, so that we don't put ourselves as a company that is just employing people from a particular region in the country. So these are ways in which companies try to comply with.
Right, that's great to know that there's a lot of emphasis on the job description rather than on the traits that you have mentioned. I think like that's some good point to know that employers are basically kind of going through such policies where more emphasis is given on the job description and the skill set, and also outsourcing and aspects of having a panel of interviewers which balance the it may be about the education background or it may be about the religious background. So it will also kind of give a more transparency on the recruitment process, and subsequently, as you mentioned, the balancing audits more to do with the equality and stuff like that also kind of give a good sign of how the companies are kind of looking at eradicating the workplace discrimination perspectives. So I would want to understand, like, what are the biggest challenges facing companies today in Nigeria when it comes to implementing an effective workplace safety policies? Also, how effective are the labor regulations in Nigeria in ensuring the workplace safety, particularly in high risk industries?
Okay, yes, I'll start from the last question you posed at me. Yes, so in terms of our legal framework, I would confess that we have a fantastic legal framework in Nigeria. We have the Constitution, 1999 Constitution, which talks about the fundamental rights of citizens, and some of them include the rights for your dignity to be respected, for you to be treated very well. We have the Labor Act, we have the Factories Act, and the Constitution of Nigeria also establishes the National Industrial Courts. And in that same section, it says that Nigerian courts, the National Industrial Courts, can enforce ILO conventions, International Labour Organization conventions. And the ILO conventions, they have up-to-date conventions on various areas of discrimination and how to improve the welfare of employees. So all these regulations, all these treaties and conventions are fully implemented in Nigeria. Nigeria is a signatory to most of all these conventions. And the NIC has been working fantastically very well. They've been doing very well in trying to uphold the rights of employees and protect the rights of employees. So as far as the legal framework is concerned, I would say I will score Nigeria in 95%. We have the laws. Of course, I must admit that the Labor Act and the Factories Act need to be updated because they are outdated. Most of their provisions are very, very old. The fines and the punishment sections are very, very low. And the Labor Act has not taken care of, the gig economy. In the gig economy now, we have different types of employees now. The Labor Act didn't recognize that. So there is still room for improvement. But as it is now, we also have the Employee Compensation Act, which talks about how to compensate employees who get injured or who die in the course of their work. So for legal framework, we are very perfect. That's very good, although there is room for improvement. Then regarding the challenges you say companies face towards ensuring safety at the workplace, one of the major challenges is, because, I must confess, our population in Nigeria, the literacy level is very, very high, and when the literacy level is high, what it means is that you have a lot of unskilled workers. And when you have unskilled workers, when you teach them on what to do, equipments to wear, following guidelines, some of them believe that it's not necessary. We tell them to put on safety boots, they will tell you that it is not necessary. You give them money to go for training, they don't want to do the training. They just believe in just doing things the way. So when you have an unskilled population, training them, communicating with them, teaching them the best practices can be very difficult. Another challenge companies face in Nigeria is the red tapeism and bureaucracy. You know, a lot of, before you can work on a project or do any construction, you need several permits for fire, for safety, for building approval and all that. The process towards getting some of these permits can be very cumbersome and can be very, very it takes a lot of time for you to complete. But I know the Lagos State government is trying to do a lot regarding simplifying the process for securing all these approvals. But you know, when you have to move from, most of them are not digital. You don't apply for them virtually. You have to push papers. You have to go to the ministries physically. So if you can bring technology into the process for applying for these permits and approvals, it's going to make it easier for companies to comply with most of all these regulations and all. And of course, you have some companies that just want to make significant they want to make high profits. You know, they don't want to invest significantly to get the tools they're supposed to get. So they try to cut corners by using low quality materials and all that. So when you lose low quality materials, eventually it comes back to your employees because they suffer the consequence. If you are using a low quality material, maybe the cement is low quality, it's going to affect the health of your employees. It's going to lead to low structure of building. Another challenge we also have in Nigeria is that we are not really producing so much. Most of all the equipment and the materials we use for building and for construction are imported. And when you import all these materials from abroad, what it means is that there's going to be pressure on your currency. So your currency is going to be very, 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 very bad. And when your currency is bad, it impacts on your profits. So your profitability is limited. So the mere fact that all this equipment, all this machinery are being imported puts a lot of pressures on the companies, on the manufacturer. So they don't have a lot of resources to play around to do the trainings they're supposed to do, to buy more equipment, to do all that. So if we can start to produce some of all these materials, some of all this equipment, it's going to ease pressure on the naira. Like we have the Dangote refinery in Nigeria now. That's going to ease pressure on the naira in terms of importing fuel from abroad, you know. So those are the challenges that I see that companies have in Nigeria at the moment.
Right. Thanks for bringing those multiple, acts like Factories Act and the Labor Acts pertaining to the legal framework. I wanted to know specifically on the support and compensation that's available through, these legal framework, especially the Employee Compensation Act. For the workers who suffer injuries or illnesses, due to unsafe working conditions in Nigeria, and do you think that it is adequate, in the year 2024 when it comes to the current, compensation that is coming up for the workers?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very good question. You know, in the past, around 2012, 2011, there was this argument. We have the law that governs compensation is the Employee Compensation Act. And when the law was first enacted, it was very welcomed. Everybody was excited about it and all that. But there was a challenge with a particular section of the law, Section 12. Some people were of the view that based on the provision of the Act, if an employee has an injury or suffers any loss or dies in the course of the job, you go to a body called there's a fund, Employee Compensation Fund, that was created. So this fund takes care of compensation to all employees. So some people believe that once you go to that fund to apply for funds, you can't commence a lawsuit against your employer anymore. So there was this challenge. But there was a case, Amina Hassan versus Airtel Networks Limited, where someone went to court against a company for a loss suffered in the course of the job. And the court held that an employee who wants to sue the employer for a loss suffered must not go to the Employee Compensation Fund. So if you go to the compensation fund to ask for compensation, you can't come again to sue the company to ask for double compensation. So you have to choose one. So once an employee suffers a loss now, what they can do is they can either forget about the fund and go directly to the court, or they can go to the fund and get their reliefs. Of course, when the act was enacted in 2010, thereabouts, the figure was a bit good. But now, because of inflation, because of foreign exchange discrepancy and all that, the figure there is very low. So there will be a need for the law to be updated. So people will find it more convenient going to court, because I know with the court, I can ask for higher damage. Like this case I quoted now, they asked for hundreds of millions. And we have two other cases where people sued for 200 million. In a particular case, the employee's hand was cut off in the course of operating an equipment, and the court awarded 30 million naira to him as compensation. If he had gone to the fund to ask for compensation, the amount he will be entitled to will be significantly lesser than that. So what we need to do is we need to update the law so that it serves as a disincentive for people going to court. But as the law is now, the compensation is not so significant. So people will rather go to court than come come to the fund. So, I mean, that's what we have for the compensation, amongst other form of benefits that the employees will be entitled to.
Right. Thanks for addressing that. Mr. Farooq, we will take the last question of the day. I want to understand what challenges do Nigerian workers face when trying to report the incidents of discrimination at work.
Okay, yes, that's a good question. So a lot of companies now, because there's a lot of advocacy going on. So some companies have created whistleblower policy not speaking up and all that. But the challenge employees face is that they tend to be discriminated against. People use certain facts against them. Like I don't know. We once did a case where an employee had HIV, and the test was found out, and immediately the court knew about the company knew about his result. They dismissed him constructively, and we challenged that. We went to court against the company, and the court held that what the company did was wrong. It was discriminatory practice, and that you can't hold somebody to ransom because of his health challenge. When you punish people for their health status, they will not speak up. They won't come up. If somebody has the Lagos State mental health law says that if you see an employee who has mental health issues, as an employer, you must discuss with the employee and find solution to this problem. Go to the hospital. But if they come, and the law also says that you cannot dismiss an employee, you cannot terminate his employment based on a mental history or a mental challenge he's facing. So if an employee who has that sort of challenge comes to you and you discriminate against him, or you terminate his employment, other employees will not come up. Other employees won't come up. So what we need companies to act responsibly. When you find out this sort of issues, don't victimize them, because when you victimize people don't speak up. And that's why you see people going on social media, writing all sorts on social media, anonymizing their names. They're talking about a company, saying what's happening in that company without mentioning their names, because they know that if they report that issue to the management of the company is going to fight back and is going to try and punish or discipline them. So, we need to work together. But I must admit that there are some companies that are open to this sort of ideas. When you report, they work with you, and they believe in your mental health. They believe in maintaining your secrecy and your confidentiality regarding your health status and all that. So I think it's a mixed bag approach. That's what I'll say on that.
Right. You rightly said, like it's kind of moderate approach, and where there are multiple aspects to look into, like rather than kind of rewarding. If you start punishing, then there will be kind of a stigma attached to come out with the actual problems by the employees at the workplace. That's quite insightful conversation, and this brings us to the end of this conversation, Mr. Farooq. Thanks for helping us and our audience understand the various aspects of employment discrimination and workplace safety in Nigeria, and you have also covered about the gender bias concerns. We appreciate you for taking time for this podcast and sharing invaluable advice. Once again, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Siraj. It felt like I just spoke with you for 5 minutes. I didn't know time had gone. So always a pleasure. I had a good time talking to you and sharing my experience, and I will always be available to discuss with you whenever the need arises. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks again. So viewers, that's about today's episode with Advocate Faruq Abbas, which brings the insightful understanding on employment discrimination and workplace safety, and also highlights the gender bias concerns at workplace in Nigeria. So we hope this conversation was knowledgeable. For more updates and information on legal concepts, please visit our website www.advotalks.com, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Advotalks.